Bill.
All right, I think it's, hey, Bill. No, we got one more.
Hey.
Good morning, everybody. All right, it's 10:03. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, especially on this 3-day weekend. Thank you all for joining. My name is Ivan Garcia. I'm the programming manager here with the Butte County Association of Governments and this year's RTPA moderator. I'd like to thank Caltrans, Francis and John for giving us your time to go over the CTP2050 and the Itsp. You know, I did receive various emails from different agencies asking if we can get this together. With that, Francis, do you want to get us started? I'm not going to go through introductions. If you do speak, please introduce yourself so we all know who you are. And if you are not speaking, please mute yourself.
Sure. Hi, my name is Francis Diaz-Sanchez, and I am the Interregional Transportation Strategic Plan Program Manager here at Caltrans. My colleague Scott Sauer, whom I think many of you know, will be joining us in a little bit. So I'll be providing an overview on the ITSP update efforts, and I believe my colleague John Thurston is here to present on the CTP 2050 today. And I think the CTP, the CTP is currently out for public comment right now. So, John?
Yep, correct. And I did send it over to Yvonne, and I believe you sent it out to the group, correct?
What's that?
The CTP 2050 website and draft materials.
Well, the link's available. I printed it myself. I don't think that was. I think everybody has it, or they can find it.
Okay.
Yeah, there were emails that went out to the groups.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And if you see more than one, that you know, we're taking that as a good sign if you get more than one of those emails, because we want to make sure this gets out to all our partners and stakeholders. So there we go. So I think, Francis, do you want me to start off since I think I'm first on the agenda?
Yeah, you want to kick it off? You are
Yeah.
the broader plan. You are the state transportation plan, so we'll kick off with you.
All right, perfect. And then I did put together a PowerPoint, or I can go through these bullets that Yvonne sent out and keep it a little more conversational. It's up to you guys.
Let's reserve maximum time for questions.
Okay, cool. Perfect. So then I'll go through the bullets on this, and then that'll leave plenty of time for questions for you guys. And I apologize, I had some technical difficulties with my phone, so I don't have a camera to share with, unfortunately. But so let's start with the CTP's background. So the CTP is a state and federally mandated document. We have a minimum of a 25-year planning horizon. This one goes to 2050. As part of that mandate, we're required to cover some topic areas, and we're also mandated to show how we're going to meet the statewide GHG emissions targets. Specifically, in the legislation, it states that the plan is not to be fiscally constrained. So our document is not fiscally constrained due to that. And so getting into some of the major differences you're going to see in this CTP versus the 2040, we added the equity goal, and there's a focus on equity throughout the document. It's something that we put a lot of work into, and it's equity is reflected in our vision. It's in our call to action. It's in the new equity goal. It's in the equity recommendation. And you're also going to see some tie-ins in other goal areas as well. A main change to the goals that we also made, we split climate and environment into 2 separate goal areas. The CTP has this climate mandate, and because of that, when you put those 2 together, the climate mandate overshadows an environmental mandate, and those 2 things are important, and we want to make sure we're giving enough space and enough time for each one of those topics in the document. In addition to that, the CTP uses technical analysis to support the policy that's developed in the document. And so in this CTP, our technical analysis more refined. We were able to do some exploratory land use modeling. We were able to fine tune our pricing policies. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So the purpose of the CTP is to provide a unifying policy document for the entire transportation system. So, and this is supposed to, we kind of are a great opportunity to take a look at what the state's been doing and then adapt to the new direction of new, the new governor, that kind of stuff, and really make sure that we're fine tuning. And the CTP is a great time to readjust policies and to reflect the newest and brightest policies. As an overarching policy document, we give recommendations and direction, and then through the districts and through you, our regional partners, this policy is carried out in the plans you develop and the projects you develop. And this also ties into implementation, which we'll get to at the end. So how the CTP relates to the other modal plans prepared by Caltrans, so like the ITSP, like the freight plan, we provide the overarching policy framework. For example, the ITSP is going to use our goals, and those will be one and the same. So our goals will be the ITSP's goals. They're going to add some more specifics. They're going to fill in some of the details. They're also, our modal plans help us implement the CTP. They really carry our policies forward and start moving them into planning for projects. So the general content and scope of the document. As the state long-range plan, we're broad. We kind of have an overview of California, the transportation system, kind of the big picture items. We also tie into how we relate to legislation, such as, well, N1919 is a big topic that we've been looking at right now. As well as the Secretary's new statement on racial equity. So we kind of tie all of these big picture items together and try and tune it to specific goals and recommendations. So the relationship of the CTP to RTPs and MPOs and the SCSs. When we started developing the CTP, we pulled 300 plus strategies from our RTPs and MPO, or the RTPAs and the SCSs, as well as other state plans. So we built a base of strategies that we pull from, and these strategies were then added to the policy developed by our policy advisory committee to really create recommendations. So we're consuming some of these strategies, and then we're also providing, so for the next, it's kind of a circle almost. We consume some of these policies and strategies, and we put out a new recommendation or vision, and then these are carried out in the RTPAs, and it keeps iterating back and forth, and so we keep feeding each other and it's a feedback loop. We also utilize the RTPAs for our network, for our modeling. So our modeling uses all regional assumptions for what will be for planned and programmed projects in 2050. So that's what our network's based off of. And then we use the MPOs for our modeling is built off of the MPO and regional models.
Hey, John.
Mm-hmm.
Which MPO has a vehicle operating cost increasing by 50% in 2050?
So those were based off of research done by the 4 big MPOs. So it might not.
But are they in their plans? Is that assumption in their plans?
I'm gonna have to double check on that with our modeling folks. They utilized research that was done by the 4 big MPOs.
I'll tell you it's not.
Okay.
And I want to point that out because you keep saying you're basing it on the regional plans, but your assumptions in 2050 are not. And the way you describe how you're setting up the policies and then the regions are supposed to implement it, it doesn't work that way because you haven't fiscally constrained your plan.
Yeah, I just made myself a note to talk to our regional modeler to see how we provided data from our traffic model, which is currently completely being updated. So,
is this the time for questions and discussion?
Well, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I just wanted to address that because I just don't think that's right.
This is Christine with Fresno Cog. I was on the CTP technical committee, and the Caltrans and the consulting team did go through the scenario modeling with the technical committee. And my understanding is for CTP2050, they did not really use the land use from the region's SCS in the modeling. So I think they probably use, I don't know what happened. And secondly, they did not really use the social economic forecast assumption or forecast that the regions use in our latest SCS. So these are not based on the region's plans.
So let's look into that a little bit more. So we did use, so our baseline is built off of the regional models. Yes. What we did with the land use, we also had an exploratory land use modeling where we looked at densities and changing densities. Now, none of this was ever meant to be a specific policy and say, hey, we need to do this. It was all meant to be more exploratory, and that is because of the nature of us being in a unconstrained plan. So we're not saying that, hey, we should do X policy to increase land use. We're saying if land use densities increase, there is an impact on VMT. So that is part of our modeling. Our modeling is never meant to be the end all be all. It's an abstraction of what we're currently seeing. So we do use our regional partners' information and build it in that. And then, so the model was updated through a separate contract, which I can reach out and get some more of that model update information for you guys so you can know specifically which iteration of the regional models was used, if that's helpful.
I think it's needed, John, and
Okay.
you know, not to be quite honest, I need to dig deep into the review of this, but you know, just at a glance, right or wrong, what I hear is, you know, you're developing an unconstrained document here that's not based on constrained plans or our SESs, but it's setting the stage for future programming decisions. So that's the part that I'm having trouble swallowing right now. To me, it screams red flag, red flag. Like, wait a minute, are you or aren't you using our RTPs that are financially constrained? And I know the predicament you're in. You're developing an unconstrained scenario, which could mean anything, but you're using that to set the stage on what we can compete for. That's all. All right.
And I definitely, I see the issue there, and I'm more than happy to have some more focused discussions on how we can better address this. I think we have one actually scheduled with Bill.
And that'd be great.
We haven't scheduled
That would
yet.
be, and that would be helpful so that I could bring in our modeling and SES expert. Just to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. But okay, thank you. What else do you got? You want to? Anything else regarding model? Sorry,
Actually,
go ahead, Bill.
I just want, John, the reason why this is really, really important is if you look at the statute and what you have to do in 2025, you have to analyze the regional fiscal constrained plans and state how they're achieving what's going on in your plan, which you've just called unfiscally constrained and aspirational. And so you're setting us up, if you're not careful here, and if you don't explain exactly in your plan, you should be taking 5 pages in your plan at the very beginning and telling the public and the legislature why this is not a straight up RTP roll up, because that's how everybody just assumes that the regional plan should add up to the state plan. You started that out in your own description, and that is just flat wrong, because our constrained plans at best show what we can do with our given resources to achieve the targets we have to do, but we're constrained. You don't have any constraints, and you have a 50% vehicle operating cost. And just to give you, that's 9 cents a mile. And just to give you a data point that I use, SB1 increased vehicle operating costs by 0.01 cents a mile. So that's a pretty big jump.
Right.
Yeah, and we're already under the watchful eyes of ARB on, are we working toward our targets?
So if you're seeing red flags here, I want you to go through the rest of your presentation, but I want you to know I think you've got to really, I think you need to explain. I think your solution here is you need to educate everybody what the CTP is. And I use the term, and I'm writing a piece that with this title that says this, the CTP2050 is essentially a statewide APS because it's not fiscally constrained. And you need to educate the people, because otherwise we're going to have another SB526 and everything else for the next 3 years, because people are going to say the regional plans are not achieving the CTP. We can't. We don't have the money unless you're going to impose all these pricing that you think you're going to impose. Okay, I'm done. But that's right. The problem in a nutshell.
But John, this is great. This is great information, I know, for me to better understand. So thank you. Keep going.
Right. And I want to reiterate, we want to work with you guys on this, and we want to make sure we're getting this correct. So I'll take this back, and we'll have some discussions. I'll set something up with Gabe, and he's my supervisor, and up to Marlon, because I know we were going to set something up with Bill later to discuss this as well. And so we'll work on this. Okay.
Thank you.
So let's see, we were just into the modeling. And so we kind of got into some of the details of the modeling and what it's there for. And the modeling is there to, like I said, to be exploratory and to show what the effects are. That doesn't necessarily mean that the modeling is the policy that we're going to recommend. So let's take pricing, for example. We do have a recommendation on pricing, and our recommendations are that we aren't making a recommendation for a 50%. Well, we're recommending a pricing policy that is built off of some principles, such as pricing needs to be done in an equitable fashion. In our plan, we consider pricing for the 4 MPOs. We're not looking at it for the four big MPOs, and we're not looking at it outside of those areas right now. We also have to make some assumptions for equity for our lowest, for the lowest quantile of earners. So whatever pricing program is developed needs to consider these things. So that's really what we're pushing for in our recommendations. We also have recommendations based around our other areas, such as advancing ZV adoption, and we have some in the accessibility. We also lean heavily on the statewide, or the state rail plan. So we have a set of recommendations for each of those areas, and where we've pulled those strategies are from those modal plans, are from some of the RTPAs, and from other state documents. So in this plan too, in the guidelines by CTC, we also need to start considering CTP implementation. And I think this is another great area where we can have some of these discussions, like what does it mean to implement a CTP recommendation? And really at the end of the day, the districts and you guys are the ones implementing these policies through your plans, through your projects. So as part of that, we need to have some collaborative efforts to develop performance measures. So in this CTP, we're going to have a framework developed alongside the CTP, but we still have to do the work of actually developing CTP implementation post-adoption of the CTP.
Hey, John,
Mm-hmm.
if your plan requires pricing, who is responsible for implementing that pricing? Who has the authority?
So right now, looking at a variety, it's spread out through the regions, it's spread out through Caltrans, depending on whose facility you're on.
Name you, by regions, do you mean sales tax authorities or MTC's regional pricing authority, but that's created by special legislation? What regional pricing is there beyond the county level?
So when we consider pricing, we're considering everything from bridge tolls up through managed lanes, hot lanes, toll lanes, that kind of stuff. It's all kind of grouped together in our pricing.
Well, you also have cordon pricing. Who's going to do that?
So that's part of the conversation that we need to have moving forward, is as a state, is whose responsibility is this and where does the responsibility lie? So
well, I hope that you recognize that there will need to be state legislation and perhaps constitutional changes for some of your recommendations, and that you put that performance metric on the state.
Okay.
Because right now, all you're saying is we have this plan and we're going to judge the regions on how they're creating these standards.
Right.
And John, this is Mike Woodman with Nevada County Transportation Commission. In reading through the CTP 2050, you highlight on some of the benefits that related from COVID on teleworking, telecommuting, those type of things. A really easy low-hanging fruit is, why doesn't the state or the governor just do an executive order that X percentage of all state agencies need to implement a telecommuting, teleworking policy, analyze that BMT benefit, and then the regions could actually incorporate that benefit into their SCSs, and the state would actually be doing something to contribute to reducing BMT, which would be refreshing for a change.
Right. Okay. We can definitely pull that in as part of, and take a look at it and see how we can fit that into a recommendation.
All right. Do you have other items to present, John, or do we want to see if there's more questions?
Let's open it up for questions. I'll answer what I can, and anything I can't answer, I will take back and discuss with management as well. So
Great. Anybody else?
Yeah, I got a question.
Jose
My
Luis?
question is for Bill, but I suppose John could also answer it. Where's that 50% increase in cost of
So
vehicles?
if you go to the scenario, their 2050 scenario that they model in their last section, you will, and they lay out the different strategies. The first one's road pricing. And road pricing is, they say it's a 50% increase in vehicle operating costs, and that does not account for the cordon pricing that they would put on top of that. There are also, I haven't raised, I mean, when we get into the implementation strategies, there's one provision that suggests that they're going to use the pricing for transit and affordable housing, which to me raises Article 19 issues, because how are you going to pull money from housing and or put it onto housing and account for Article 19? So there's a constitutional change required in their framework. And they're also saying that they're not going to charge the bottom, which is a good policy, charge the bottom 25% of income households for road pricing. There's that assumption as well. We can get creative about how you achieve that. That's a good objective. There's a lot, I think there's a lot of, and John can answer this, there's a lot in the plan, but there's also a scenario at 2050 that they run. And my question for John is this. The statute requires you to develop a maximum feasible strategy to achieve your goal. I do not see anywhere where you analyzed the maximum feasibility of the model and scenario that you're using for 2050. I searched your whole plan for the word feasible and I couldn't find it. So I don't think your plan right now measures up to the statute itself.
Okay. Anybody else?
I'd like John to tell me how they did if they did a maximum feasible analysis and where I can find that.
So I'm going to have to go back and look at the statute myself and read it. But in regards to our modeling, yeah, I'm going to have to take a look at the statute and read it. And I think what you're running up into is this, as an unconstrained plan, how do you demonstrate something is feasible? And that is something that is a fine line for us to walk.
But I think if the statute says that you have to, and go back and read the statute, you'll see you're supposed to come up with a maximum feasible strategy. The very least you need to do is analyze it.
Right. And so through our modeling, we explore a realm of possibilities. And I think that our recommendations and that kind of stuff in our policy that we're developing is where we're aiming to get to the feasibility, right? As the modeling is an abstraction, so it's hard to say that, you're going to hit X target as a solid benchmark.
So I'll just close with this final scenario, because when I was really thinking about it, and I've talked to a couple of MPO directors about it, if the shoe were on the other foot and an MPO was submitting an SCS that said the way that we achieve the target is we get a 50% increase in vehicle operating costs by 2050, the advocates would cry foul. Federal highways would not accept it because it's not a current planning assumption that is reasonable. And ARB would reject the plan as not being able to achieve it. We could not get away with that. So that in a capsule is why I'm being a little bit assertive here in this Q&A, because your description of the plan, your plan is, here's a plan that the regions should strive to achieve, but we can't. And you need to go back and take a look at that and read the statute. And I'm not saying change your plan, but you need to educate everybody about why your plan is an aspiration and how a fiscally constrained plan is really, really different, because there's one sentence on it on page 17 or something like that, and that's just not enough.
I definitely agree with that, and that is something we can work on and we can get strengthened in the plan. I definitely agree with that.
Anybody else? Going once, twice.
Hey, John.
So,
John, this is Mike Woodman with Nevada County Transportation again. Just one more comment. You know, the CTP2050, in portions of it, it does a good job in terms of talking about equity in relation to and including, you know, the racial justice issue. But I think, you know, anywhere we're kind of talking about social equity, we need to be talking about economic equity, geographic equity. You know, when you get to page 13 and it starts talking about our challenges, you know, it talks about advancing racial justice. And yes, that's, you know, the current hot topic, but embedded in that is, you know, equity, you know, economic equity, geographic equity. It's, you know, our rural economically disadvantaged areas across the state. So we need to look at this holistically and make sure that that language relays that kind of holistic view.
Definitely something we can incorporate.
Yvonne, it's Adrienne Cardoso with the CTA. I just have a clarifying question. You mentioned that the pricing strategies that you were mentioning, you said that they've been applied to the more urban areas. Was that just to create a more conservative calculation, or is there a sentiment that pricing strategies would somehow just be applied to urban areas?
So one that's kind of based on some geographic equity. Our rural partners and our partners outside of the four big MPOs, they don't have as many transportation options. So adding pricing on top of that is not equitable. It's also, that's the main focus is because that's where 75% more or less of VMT reduction can occur. So that's the biggest areas to generate VMT reduction.
Okay. All right. That it sounds a little just interesting how that would be deployed. Are we talking about like, I mean, what types of strategies are you talking about? Because it just seems odd that you would apply those to the urban centers where there also should not be a lot of VMT growth. And is there, I mean, I hate to say it, but is there a possibility that that could create a sprawl situation where people are moving into rural communities to avoid higher costs in urban centers, which I think is counterproductive to some of the, you know, the executive order goals.
Mm-hmm. Right, and that is something that our policy advisory committee had some discussions on. You know, we don't want to be encouraging sprawl type land use. So I will go back through. So that is one at the, that's kind of at the nexus of our modeling is one set of actions, and then our policy has to refine that and say, okay, you know, these are what move the needles, but here's the policy that we need to develop around it. And some of it is stuff that we can't, some of the policy requires a lot more work than, so we can identify like, hey, we need to look deeper into this area, but it might not necessarily be the direct answer to that policy question.
Thank you.
Hey, John, can you go over the schedule to finalize and the next steps?
Okay, so our next steps.
Yvonne,
Oh,
can I just have one last comment?
Go
John,
ahead, Phil.
Yeah, one other thing that you know, I think needs to get recognized in the CTP 2050, it does address induced demand, and I think a lot of time folks at the administration and the advocate level are looking at that at the 10,000 foot level. But when you really look at induced demand, not all capacity increasing projects induce demand. And a lot of rural capacity increasing projects, although they increase capacity, all the factors that drive induced demand aren't present. And there's the statement in the plan that, you know, induced demand requires us to accommodate the growing demand primarily within the footprint of our existing roadway system. And to me, that's not really true. There's certain strategic capacity increasing projects, like for example, in rural areas that don't actually induce VMT, but there could be strategic projects that increase capacity in an urban area where that's why you have CEQA and Senate Bill 743 to look at the VMT impacts and determine whether the benefits outweigh the impacts. So, you know, I think we have to be careful with kind of general statements like that, such as on page 41, because advocates and other folks at the 10,000 foot level don't understand the reality of things on the ground level.
Okay, definitely. We can take a look at that.
Good comment, Mike. John, did you want to just wrap up on schedule to finalize the next steps?
Yeah, not a problem. So our public review draft is available, or is the period goes through October 22nd. And we're more than happy if you guys have comments that you want to discuss, if you want to submit them early, and so we can kind of take a look at them and have a discussion similar to what we're going to be doing with Bill. We're more than happy to do that. If you want to reach out to us early, it's available through, you can submit your comments at CTP at dot.ca.gov, and I'll make sure I send all these links and emails over to Yvonne so he can send them out to you guys. Our plan is available at www.ctp2050.com, or you can reach out to me directly as well. So after we get the plan back, or we get our comments back, we're going to spend a week editing the document, and then we're going to start circulating it up to management for their review. And so we hope to have the document finalized by December, well, by the end of the year.
Having said that, I'm going to encourage everybody to really go through the document and provide your comments. That's not a whole lot of time. All right. Was there something else, John?
I did forget to mention September 25th, we are doing a webinar. Jeannie Ward-Waller will be presenting some information on the CTP, and there will be a question and answer period with that as well.
Good.
Excuse me, this is Elizabeth Hahn. Is it possible that the comments that are made to the plan can be made public?
I have to check in with management on that and how that all works.
Can you let us know once you check in?
Yeah, and if you can't send them to me, John, I'll make them available.
Yeah, hey John, this is Erin Thompson from Regional Planning. Yeah, any comments that are submitted publicly, and I can work with you too on how we did it for the RTP guidelines and like the grant guide and things like that. But yeah, anything that's submitted electronically is actually the Public Records Act. So I'll work with state planning to see how we can get those disseminated, John, and I'll touch base with you.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you, Erin.
I've made similar requests for the comments that were made on SB 743 and through surveys and that kind of thing, and Executive Order 1919. If there's any way those could be made public as well, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Good comments.
Yvonne, are you and Dawn
Yes.
gonna do notes for today by any chance?
I'm sorry?
Are you and Dawn gonna do notes for today by any chance?
I wasn't planning on it. This is being recorded. I'll leave that up to Don, but I have an RTP to write.
Okay, so as far as the recording, will you send that out or does that get posted somewhere or
Yes.
something? Okay,
Yes.
great. Yeah, that should be fine. Thanks.
Uh-huh. You're welcome, Don.
Thank you. I actually
Okay.
late today. I don't know if my planners are on the line.
All right. John, thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Moving on. Francis. Batter up.
Go Dodgers. Anyways, so
Ouch.
again, my name is Francis Diaz-Sanchez. I am the ITSP program manager. I believe my colleague Scott Sauer from the Office of Multimodal System Planning is here. Just a heads up, apparently my internet connection is unstable. So the joys of working from home and the things that kind of pop up during this time. So I'm just going to go through the questions similar to what John did to try to maximize the time for Q&A for everyone here. So Yvonne, thank you very much for preparing these ahead of time. The first thing that you guys asked was, what is the purpose of the ITSP and the difference from the 2015? Currently, the big changes that are being done are updating our goals. So as John mentioned, we are aligning the goals with the CTP2050, and we are looking at how, from an interregional, long distance travel perspective, how this plan meets that sort of intent, sort of the interregional travel portion. So that is the big change I think you will see in terms of goals. We haven't developed the plan yet, and we're in the early stages. So I've met with the Rural Counties Task Force with Mike Woodman, and I think many others of you on here. And so this is actually our second sort of focused stakeholder meeting with the RTPA working group. So we're very early on in the plan itself. So I would say that's the big difference. And in terms of the way we're conducting analysis, we are going to continue doing sort of an interregional corridor analysis. So we are open to assessing, what should be considered in this ITSP update, what you all may think was really missing, what data we should look into, and other things that we should consider for this plan. So I hope that clarifies some of the questions there. In terms of the impacts to the regions, the ITSP, again, has focused on long distance travel, so the interregional connectivity between the regions and throughout the state. So, what are the major sort of travel corridors that Californians use, and also how we move goods. So those are the considerations that we're still looking at. So we are still assessing sort of regional connectivity, at the statewide view. So that is the impact to the region for the plan. I don't think that changes. The intent of that doesn't change per se, but I think the specifics is what you guys would probably be interested in, is the plan actually develops more from the starting point of the 2015 ITSP. And then, so I know this has been a big topic. I know some of you have met with CALSTA explicitly on the Executive Order N1919 draft action implementation plan and the strategies that they're hoping to develop to inform some of the funds that Caltrans has direct control over, one of which is the ITIP. And I see, you know, the question that has come up in the past at some of the commission meetings as well. You know, does it impact prior commitments at this time? What has been programmed shouldn't impact what's down the pipeline, but you know, we are trying to find ways to align with what does come out of EON 1919 for future projects. So, you know, we are looking at sort of what are the short-term implications? Does that change? You know, for us, we don't see any changes in when funding becomes available for the ITIP, because I think there's a lot of discussion specifically on what the revenues might be for this 2022 cycle, what that may mean. And then long term, you know, what sort of projects do we think will be coming out, you know, based on the ITSP development. I do think that the projects may be a little more diverse than they have been in the past in terms of, you know, we may see a few more rail projects, but, you know, it's still going to have to be developed in conjunction with you guys, with all our transportation stakeholders and partners and CTC staff on explicitly the STIP guidelines for the ITIP portion. However, you know, the big departure from the original ITSP, we did broaden sort of, you know, what funding could be available to make interregional improvements. And, you know, at our last meeting with the Rural Counties Task Force, Mike and everyone did bring up that, you know, there are challenges in different parts of the state where, you know, the funding just doesn't really fit well. So for some of these projects, for them to be eligible for. So that is something that we are looking into and taking into consideration for this plan. Sorry, as I toggle back and forth, I only have one monitor for my laptop. So we will be updating the project selection criteria for this plan. You know, again, what was in the 2015 ITSP for the ITIP specifically is going to be reevaluated. And so, you know, just to reiterate, there hasn't been anything that's been developed yet. So as we look at the criteria and what we're utilizing, or what has been utilized and what else we could potentially utilize, that's what we will take into consideration. You know, in the past, we did use 5-axle truck volume data. We know that, you know, currently there's a lot of recreational tourism in California for people trying to stay, I guess, as local as possible, but, you know, that's affected some of our facilities and system there. And we would love to work with you, and we've been working with our districts and trying to find, you know, other data points that we could incorporate for this ITSP update. And John kind of touched on this point in terms of the relationship to other plans or programs. The ITIP is, well, traditionally the ITIP has been unique because, you know, a lot of it was focused on, you know, state highways that are on the interregional road system. There are 93 state highways there, and so those are the roads that are eligible for ITIP funding. And so the ITSP prioritizes the state highways and includes intercity rail. So we have a unique relationship with the rail plan, and we are trying to work with our colleagues in the Division of Rail Mass Transit to see how the ITSP also can implement portions of the rail plan, since funding is available for the intercity rail intercity passenger rail lines. So there's that specific relationship. We are one of the modal plans that, you know, does try to implement the California Transportation Plan. So that's why we're utilizing the goals to do that alignment, and again, kind of looking through what, you know, we can fully potentially execute in trying to achieve some of the goals outlined in the CTP 2050. Additionally, you know, we have focused also on goods movement because of these sort of inherent like travel patterns and where goods move through California and out of California. And into California, I guess, if you look at it from the border perspective. So those are the three really core, I think, plans as what like the ITSP takes into account during the development. So please let me know if you could, well, we'll get to questions at the very end. So that's it. And then we work very closely with the Division of Transportation Programming, or Transportation Finance now. I think they changed their name, so it's a little getting used to on our end. And we'll be working with them, you know, when they do the update to the, not just to the ITIP, but anytime there are updates to other things that may affect project selection. So, you know, we do have a very close relationship with everyone in transportation financing. For the public involvement process and regional engagement, I think you may have heard from our director that, you know, there is additional emphasis on ensuring that we have ongoing and meaningful engagement with our partners, you know, both in terms of stakeholders and, you know, our actual transportation planning partners in the public. So this, you know, I apologize for missing you guys last time, but I think, you know, with this dedicated time, I hope we're able to answer any questions that you may have and get you involved early on and be able to return to these meetings to provide you regular updates or to schedule any other specific meetings for, you know, explicit questions you may have. So in terms of subcommittees, you know, we're more than happy to come back to you, to the RCTF, to any working group that wants us to provide updates and engage. I think one thing that we were exploring potentially is continuing to present at the California Freight Advisory Committee, and also seeing if, you know, people would be interested in continuing the potentially the CTP PAC is another avenue for us to kind of bring some broad topics for not just the ITSP, but for other modal plans too. I can touch base with Marlon and Jeannie on sort of the question of subcommittees, but we have been presenting regularly with all our partners as best we can, and to continue presenting and providing regular updates as to what's going on with the ITSP. So here's the much more technical question, I think, for us here. How do agencies request routes or corridors to be included in the ITSP? So, you know, if you're looking specifically for ITIP eligible, they do again have to be on the legislatively designated interregional road system. So, you know, specifically for the ITIP, that is something that, you know, has been the basis for consideration, and it hasn't changed. So if it isn't on one of the 93 routes, unfortunately, it wouldn't be eligible, and it gets very specific as to, you know, which post mile is eligible for what. But anyways, at a high level, there's that. But in terms of like other considerations that we may have missed within the actual corridor, we can have meetings and engage with both the districts and yourself that you work with to discuss, you know, what sort of critical linkages we may have missed or need to consider within the corridor. So we take a continued holistic look at, you know, how travel moves through. We do recognize that, you know, there are geographic and regional differences as to what a corridor may look like. Some may have a lot of modes and options, and others, you know, for the corridor really is the state highway. So we understand that, you know, it looks different throughout California. And, you know, we can have ongoing discussions as to what sort of connectivity, again, the last ITSP may have potentially missed, and what needs to be considered. So I think currently one of the biggest things on our mind, you know, given all the fires, are emergency evacuation routes. That is something we've heard a lot from not just our partners, Mike Woodman and others in our CTF, but I think it's just a topic that has come up, and I think we've discussed internally sort of, you know, beyond the ITSP, you know, how we need to potentially engage, or not potentially engage, but really work with the Office of Emergency Services and sort of integrate, you know, how statewide we need to look at sort of these ongoing events of evacuations due to fire or flooding or whatever sort of disasters that are coming our way these days. So that is something that we are looking at and assessing more significantly in this plan too. Again, I think with tourism, we have a lot of data on sort of peak hour counts. You know, one of the challenges that I think Caltrans has had that we don't have the greatest data on is tourism per se, especially on weekend trips, and sort of deciphering, you know, some of that. We do know generally where some of the major tourism hotspots are, and, you know, some of the routes that people take to get there, and understanding a lot of them, you know, are accessed by car mostly, unless, you know, you're going to San Diego or the Bay Area where you might have more options. I'm from LA, so I know there are options there, but, you know, still car dependent in a lot of ways. So, and again, you know, for freight, we're working with our freight office and our districts on sort of discussing commodities in the state and how they move, because, you know, we do know that the state freight tiered network from the last plan to this California Freight Mobility Plan changed, meaning there is no tiered freight network. So we are looking at sort of the commodity side in addition to, you know, some of the past information that was there. And, you know, to touch on, again, the geographic and economic equity. Equity is a very critical topic right now, and it's something that, you know, we're integrating in our work at Caltrans. And, you know, we're not going to lose sight of the fact that, you know, there are challenges that that each region kind of faces in a different capacity, and, you know, how we get these projects done. We need to highlight some of those challenges in getting the projects funded, or these improvements, and what they mean to people, and how the investments are important. So that's what I have in terms of some of the questions. I apologize if I went through it very quickly. Hopefully I didn't cut out. In terms of the schedule, we're hoping to have some stakeholder workshops virtually at the end of October, the beginning of November. Been working with our engagement consultant, MIG, on kind of exploring that. So it would be 2 webinars. So when that information comes to light, we will definitely, you know, push that out and let everyone know. But tentatively, that's the time period we're looking at. We did want to host them in the fall and before Thanksgiving, 2 weeks at least before Thanksgiving, but yeah. So there's that. We were hoping to have a public draft out in January of 2021, and for the plan to be done by March 31st, 2021, but we're currently evaluating our schedule and timeline because, you know, there are a lot of things kind of moving, and we want to ensure that the plan we develop, you know, is meaningful, and that we've done the engagement correctly, and we've really done the analysis and the considerations that, you know, will come forth from our partners and our stakeholders to take into account. So, you know, that's currently what our schedule is, and, you know, should it change, I will let you guys know, and all our partners know. So just, you know, we are looking at that currently to see if changes need to be made. So in terms of next steps, you know, if you guys have questions, I'm happy to try to answer them the best I can. And if I don't have an answer, I'll, you know, make sure to be able to come back to you guys, you know, when I'm able to get all the information down.
That seems like an aggressive schedule for a draft in January. and you don't have project selection criteria done yet.
Correct. So
I know that's one thing that popped out to me is how do the RTPAs be included as part of that criteria development?
yeah. So Yvonne, again, complete transparency, that is something that we looked at, and, again, the emphasis from the department on meaningful engagement. This is something that we, have had discussions on. And so, most likely the schedule is going to change and be pushed out. But, just kind of finalizing our discussions here on this point. And, to inform everyone what the schedule change, and timeline will be. But that actually is part of the reason why we started evaluating it, because we did want to have meaningful discussions with our partners and the public on this, and to be able to do the plan well, not just rushed per se. So
good. Let's open it up.
I've got a question. This is Elizabeth Hahn.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed in the prior ITSP that there's very limited number of corridors that are shown oriented east-west, especially from the Valley to the Bay Area, and just kind of wondered why that's the case. I guess also I would be interested, if possible, if there could be an opportunity to take another look at that, and, with regards to goods movement.
So Elizabeth, yeah, that's actually something that has come up even in our discussions with our district counterparts, and we know that that's been another question I think we've heard about, sort of east-west connectivity. I think one of the things that we are open to the discussion and kind of talking about, if there are missing east-west connections potentially to the Bay Area from that region, and sort of the data that would support sort of the additional analysis or need for that corridor. And I think one of the challenge, I wouldn't say challenges, but I think one of the factors that we did kind of look at too is just the, not accessibility, but year-round sort of, I guess in that term, like availability too. And if there are things that we missed, we are more than happy to have discussions with you and our Caltrans districts for those routes and where they lie.
Yeah, that would be terrific. I know we had submitted some requests regarding routes that in Stanislaus County, but unfortunately they didn't make it into the plan. And the San Joaquin Valley did an interregional goods movement study, which you'll definitely, I think, would be beneficial for your team to take a close look at.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hi, Yvonne, this is Patricia Chen from LA Metro. I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Thank you. So this is Patricia, and I'm curious about a couple of things, and they're kind of interrelated. I heard you say that there may be more investment on rail. You said, maybe a few projects or something, and but this would be, worked through with the regions around the state. And I'm just kind of curious about that. I know that in terms of investing in the state highway system, depending on what happens with the implementation plan for the executive order, there could be some influence coming from that direction to get away from projects that increase capacity, or let me just say, because I know Mike Woodman's going to be sensitive on that, increase VMT on the roadways. And so I'm just kind of wondering, it's kind of two questions. One is the executive order implementation plan going to be done within a time frame that it literally would feed into the ITSP strategic plan? And then the other question being, how actually are you going to make the decision how much investment should be going into rail versus roadways? You know, is there, I'm just curious if there's some kind of technical analytical modeling process that will spit out, you know, oh, 2/3, 1/2, 1/4, or what it is that will really be guiding those decisions.
Hi, Patricia. So I think, you know, to your first point, you know, as we look at sort of the schedule modification, it may, I think the EON 1919 implementation action plan is supposed to come out in February. So, you know, with the modification, it would most likely be able to see what comes out of that plan, and we see how it the ITSP would align with that, but I think still come out and have discussions with our partners and how that affects everyone and stuff. So that is something that, you know, we do want to continue to come back to talk about when those strategies are finalized. And second, you know, in the past, we've really based sort of the selection of the projects on the project selection criteria. I think in some of the, you know, specifically for ITIP, you know, I think there has been some, in the guidelines, you know, some technical analysis for that. But, you know, in terms of, I think we'd have to work with our regional partners to incorporate that into potentially some of the modeling, you know, if there is a rail project, you know, that comes out that is, you know, really critical. You know, I think in terms of some of the VMT reduction strategies, I know that, you know, we, as John mentioned, sort of, you know, the biggest bang, or maybe John didn't mention, but I think, you know, our greatest VMT reduction efforts would come from our more urbanized areas in the state. And, you know, we're evaluating, you know, what that looks like outside of the major urban areas and stuff for this plan. Scott, do you have any other comments that you might, or things that you might want to chime in on for Patricia?
Sorry, as I'm trying to get the mute button done. I think one of the key things that we're looking at is, I think we're trying to understand, I guess, the balance between the different types of the highway versus the rail. I know that's one of the discussion points there. But we're also trying to talk about just how we connect regions. In some regions, you can connect them with rail better than others. Others, it's more of an automobile. There's other things that we have to consider as the emergency evacuations and things like that, the fires, the different things, the different types of interregional travel that we have. So we're going to be looking at the different modes and how each one of them kind of fits within a grand scheme. And I know there's a minimum requirement for rail involved in the ITIP funding that we're supposed to be doing. But we really want to do the analysis to figure out kind of, you know, the different areas, kind of how they need the different modes and kind of how the whole system works together. And really I get a better picture of the whole interregional system and all the different elements. I know VMT reduction's always been an issue, and Francis was mentioning that. It applies, I think, more relevant in some areas than other areas. We should always be looking at VMT, but really we want to be able to make sure that the regions connect in the appropriate way. I'm not sure if that really helped a lot of this discussion, but is there anything specific you were talking about, Francis, that I should add to it?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. I think that's good, Scott, but yeah.
Anybody else?
Hey, Francis and Scott, this is Mike with NCTC. Appreciate the early engagement that we're having on the update of the ITSP. You know, definitely think we could have a more robust and transparent process than the 2015 update. and it sounds like that's the direction we're headed. So I'm happy to hear that. And also a lot of the issues that, you know, you touched on today are issues that we've all been discussing. And, you know, some of my comments from the CTP 2050 discussion carry over to the Itsp. And I think it really is important to try to, you know, maintain that balance between intercity rail and the interregional highway system in the Itsp, because it drives the ITIP funding decisions. And I mean, back when you did the 2013 status report, I think 50% of the rail projects had been completed, but only 30% of the highway projects had been completed at that time. And for a lot of these interregional, especially the rural highways, you know, these projects, when we have a project that's ready to, you know, marry some RIP funding with IP funding, you know, any delays in funding those, the project costs just increase exponentially, and pretty soon little rural agencies, you know, looking at something that they can't chase after. So it's really important to be strategic about what projects we fund. You know, we can look at, you know, make sure these projects aren't, you know, significantly increasing BMT and the importance of them, but it's important to maintain that balance and really be strategic when we look at how we're gonna, you know, structure the Itsp and how that's gonna drive the investments across the state. So look forward to continuing to work with you guys.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Anybody? Going once, twice? Francis, John, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
And I'll make this available early next week.
All right.
Thank you.
Everyone have a really good weekend. Stay healthy, hydrated, safe.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.